We're thrilled to be joined by Oliver Chilton, our friend who is the business manager and whiskey maker for Elixir Distillers, which is a sprawling empire of different bottling lines and facilities and rums, whiskeys, all kinds of incredible things. And we've been fortunate to have a great relationship with them over the years. A few months back, we started receiving some new casks. So we're going to try two of those. And tonight we're going to try, which I think is probably the big hook for most of you, the 44-year-old blend that we are launching tonight, the Walter's Choice bottling, which I'm very excited about. And not just because it has my dog on the label, but because it's a gorgeous whiskey. And it's a whiskey, Ollie, that you and I talked about probably just before COVID. And I think you'd bottled some old blends for the Whiskey Exchange, which at the time you guys owned the Whiskey Exchange. And I was like, oh, I'd love to get one of these. And you're like, oh, I'll get you one of them. And then eventually it happened. You found us a parcel of old blended whiskey, and it's a stunning old dram. But yeah, we've got some exciting stuff to try here tonight.
Yeah, well, I am very much looking forward to it. I sadly don't have any of that in front of me. I do, actually, that's a lie. I think I have some old samples behind me, so I might dig those out at the end.
Quality control.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll never throw anything away.
So, Ollie, before we dive in to the range, and we're going to start with the oldest, not the oldest, the oldest single malt that we have and the most expensive whiskey in the lineup, which I like to do sometimes because it's often very delicate and, you want to appreciate it before your palate gets roughed up by some younger and more vigorous things. Do you want to give us a little background on Elixir Distillers? And I mean, you've been there now for quite a long time. You've been there for like at least a decade, if I'm not mistaken.
Coming up to 15 years.
15 years.
15 years, yeah. So Elixir's it's the bottle. Well, we used to say it's the bottling arm of the Whiskey Exchange, but obviously we sold that shop, so now it's just an independent bottler and distiller, just a wee little company. Essentially, we were a hobby business. We were started by Sukhinder Singh in kind of 2002 is probably the best way to describe it, when he started buying casks. Back in the early 2000s, independent bottling was relatively young. Obviously, there are lots of independent bottlers with big, long established dates on them, but in reality, kind of the growth of it really happened in the late 90s with companies like Duncan Taylor and Douglas Lyon really pushing on from what Gordon MacPhail and Caden Hudson and Berries had been doing before that. Sukhinder was a big buyer back then for the Whiskey Exchange, and then he started bottling just one cask at a time under Single Malts of Scotland, and I know a lot of the bottlings were going through Single Malts of Scotland. After that, we kind of introduced a few different labels, a few different brands over the years. So we bottled Bruichladdich, Isle Single Malt, which I think you got on your Kalila tasting from the look of the pictures. We also do elements of Isla, which we've done both kind of small batch product, single malt and blended malts in as well. And then we also bottle rum. And then alongside all of that, we started building a distillery just over, coming up to 12 years ago, although I try not to think of it in those terms because it makes me feel like we're very, very slow at doing anything. On Isla called Port Tryn, which will be in production, I'm going to say sometime in the next 12 months, just to make myself feel better. And then a few years back, as you said, we used to own the Whiskey Exchange. We sold that in 2021, and we basically did a swap. In 2022, we bought Tormore Distillery, which is where I live now, which is a very beautiful distillery in Speyside. If you've ever had the opportunity to come to Scotland, and if you haven't so far, do come to Speyside. As you're driving into Speyside, you can't miss us. We're the giant white building on the side of the road. It's a relatively young one, only been in operation since 1959. But we make an incredibly beautiful, elegant light spirit, one of which we're going to try tonight. We've not yet launched an official bottling. We've done a couple of pre-releases, which are coming to Canada in the next few months. but we'll be launching a full range from Tormore in 2026. So that, I think that kind of covers everything.
Yeah, a few bases. You know, Ollie, in your defense, your Isla distillery probably would have been built sooner were it not for some busybodies and politics
Well,
and all kinds
I
of
don't know.
stuff.
I don't think so. You know, we're our own worst enemy. So, you know, part of the problem was that we allowed ourselves to go and look at how to build a distillery, and then we did it in a very kind of malt whiskey enthusiastic way, which is wander around the world, ask lots of questions. The reality is we didn't actually finish the plans till probably about 2020, and then there was that thing that happened then that kind of slowed everything up. We then had some local difficulties with housing, which we've answered by building a lot of housing. I think we're currently the biggest house builder on Islay. And then obviously building on an island in Scotland has its own unique challenges. Added into that building in the UK is just frankly impossible. We work with 3 separate councils currently: Highland, Murray, and Argyll and Bute. I can promise you, don't try and build anything in the UK; it's a waste of time. So yeah, it's definitely, there are no excuses apart from we've taken far too long to do it. But it will be open next year, and when it is, you should all come over and visit, because it will be something a bit different.
Well, no, I'm looking forward to it because and I know this was in your original plans, but weren't you going to make, your plan was to make rum there as well as whiskey?
Yeah, so it's I mean, port and trin normally comes at the end of most of these conversations, but I'll do it now. So it's a slightly different distillery setup to most. The original concept was we would only have one distillery, so we would try and put everything into it. Obviously, at the time, we didn't know we'd buy a 3.5 million litre plant in the middle of Speyside. So it's basically designed to make 4 different styles of single malt whiskey in the main distillery. Roughly speaking, we'll produce around 1 million litres there. It has a capacity of about 2 million, but realistically, how we're going to run it is 1 million. And then in addition, we're building another smaller distillery inside the distillery, taking a little bit of influence from our friends up the road at Lagavulin and Malt Mill.
I was going to say, you could call it malt mill just as
we could, but then we'd end up in trouble with our friends at Diageo. Not that we've had that conversation or that there were legal letters or anything.
for sure.
And as part of that, we decided we would make it a setup so we can make everything. So we can make rye whiskey, we can, you know, what with all the issues currently with tariffs, we can make bourbon just because, you know, something has to go on your shelves in Canada that's not from America.
Who doesn't make bourbon now? I mean,
yeah.
But
and then yeah, lastly, we can also make rum, because why not?
Why not, indeed. Well, and there's been some notes in the chat. Tormore is one of the most beautiful distilleries. I've had the privilege of touring it. It's steampunk. You know, it's what I always said. It's like like if Willy Wonka built a distillery, it's what his distillery would probably look like. So not the Timothy Chalamet one, mind you, but like the original one, the Gene Wilder, Willy Wonka would build that distillery.
Yeah, for those that haven't been past it, I mean, we have a clock. It's turned off at night, which is good because it's quite loud. It plays a different Scottish tune every 15 minutes. And no apparently good reason why that exists. Our entire roof is made of copper. That's mainly a very expensive thing to upkeep. It costs about 1.2 million pounds to replace. Yeah, the whole building is just fraught with.
Well, you got a curling rink. Like there's a curling rink in front of it.
We have a curling rink outside. We have topiary shaped in the sides of stills and bells and all sorts of things. So it's definitely a place to come and explore.
Yeah, but you have to be prepared to turn, because you're doing, what is it, 60 miles an hour on the A9, or what is it, the A95? Is that the one that goes right by?
A95, yeah.
You're doing 60 miles an hour, and if you blink, you'll miss the distillery. So yeah, you got to be prepared to turn off quickly.
I mean, you're a very fast driver, Andrew, so
it's probably too fast. All right, let's dive into some malts here, Ollie. So we're starting off with the Bruichladdich 30 year from your director's special line. So I'll pop that up on screen here. So you only release a couple director's special bottlings a year, something a little bit more rare, refined. I believe Sikander himself has to personally sign off on these.
Yeah, so director special was always supposed to be the kind of the older stocks that Sikander have stashed away. The way essentially it works is we have an ongoing cask list of thousands of casks, most of which I'm carte to bottle as I like. But anything kind of certainly over 20 years, 25 years, it kind of gets put into a pool of stuff and samples get sent to Sikander to be checked before anything happens. This particular cask, this Bruichladdich, was distilled in 1992. And I remember this stock from when I started 15 years ago, and we used to bottle as non-age statement Bruichladdich and elements of Islay for 50 quid, and nobody wanted it. But it was always, to me, it's a remarkable spirit because it's really of its time. Bruichladdich, that distillery, you guys will all know this, it has a kind of checkered past. This is just after the White Mackay ownership, like just before it essentially closes altogether. And then obviously it's reopened by Jim McEwen, Mark Rainier, and Simon Coughlin in 2001. But the style they make today, from my perspective, is much, let's say, creamier, richer than this as a spirit. Back in the early 90s, they essentially made this beautiful kind of grassy, light, elegant spirit. And with 30 years in reefer wood, it ends up being this almost like haystacks and honey. The wood quality, if I'm brutally honest, is probably pretty piss poor. Like that 90s period, 80s, 90s, some of the wood, the reefer wood, was pretty old, pretty tired. And that all sounds awful. I'm sure it didn't taste great at 10 years old or at that kind of point. But the wonderful thing you end up with is loads of oxygen because they're quite leaky. So you end up with all these herbal notes over time. I sometimes get quite a lot of elderflower, that kind of thing. And for me, that's a sign of that you've got just old woods and something allowed to rest in it for a long time.
Well, I mean, wind the clock back at Bruichladdich. I mean, this was when, there was barely a handful of people working there and not consistently. So probably would we be looking at like longer fermentations because you have a couple of people working irregularly. Like, I mean,
well, all through the early 90s, Islay was, if you were running maximum 4 days a week. There were very few distilleries running more than that.
Yeah.
A lot of distilleries run shorts and longs today. I mean, we run a 5-day week here at Tormore and pretty much always have them. So you've always got these you've always got longer ferments in the mix. I don't know enough about how they mix those Bruichladdich and how they mix them historically, but you'd certainly have fruitier whiskies because things are slower. Just in general, is probably the best way of looking at it. You'd have fruitier spirits.
Well, and I think the other thing is you probably would also have a certain amount of variability. Like they would not be, like to your point about whether or not they would mix these various spirits from different fermentation times, there might have been a period where they just didn't care because none of this was destined to be single malt at the time. It was all being put down just to be blended stock at some point in the future. I mean, this is long before anyone had an idea of turning Bruichladdich into a brand again.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be brutally honest, the kind of consistency that the industry talks about is actually pretty irregular. If you're running longs and shorts as they would have been at Bruichladdich and Lefroy and more at this period of time, to mix your shorts and longs consistently, essentially you need 2 receiving tanks. This is very boring stuff, guys. So if you want me to shut up,
Dive in.
You basically have to have a tank that receives your shorts. You put all your short ferments to one tank, and you have all your longs in another tank, and then you have to have another tank that you blend those together in, so that you get an equal amount of shorts to longs. So distilleries around here that do that, or did do it until they closed, would be something like Strathmill, that has that setup. But as an example, Tormore, we don't. We have one receiving vessel, an 80,000 litre receiving vessel. So actually our make is forever going up and down in terms of our average ferment through that vessel. It's not consistent. We're talking about really small inconsistencies, but they're there. Whereas in this period of time, to your point, Andrew, Bruichladdich, they could have been closed for a week. You know, no one's filling anything. So you don't really know what's going on. Now that being said, certainly during White Mackay, they were running relatively consistently, but it wasn't like it's not like today. It's not a driven process. And the one thing I've learned being up here is even being a little bit detached from a distillery, you can't see what they're doing. So your operator's going to tell you one thing, and they're going to do whatever the hell is easiest / what they were told they've done for 50 years prior. So we've got loads of stories here from, I've got an operator here, Rod, he's been here 34 years, and he remembers when Shivers bought it, and they would say, right, we want you to change this. They would watch all the operators make the change, and then a week later, all the operators would put it back. And they're not telling anyone at head office they do that. And on Isla, I think that's true times 10.
Well, and who's going to check on you? Because I would have to imagine the ferries were a lot less regular back then than they are now.
I don't know. Can make a mission of being a regular now.
Yeah, well.
But yeah, certainly, I think bottles like this, particularly from Isla, really pick out a time and place, and that kind of, you can almost, it sounds really dark, but you can taste the slowness. You can taste the kind of detachedness from the rest of the world in it. The one thing I would love to understand a bit more about Bruichladdich in this period is yeast and what they were using. A lot of the allied distilleries, so certainly Lefroy would have been, I know also Morris and Bowmer are the same, they were still using ale yeast up until the late 90s. So you have these inconsistencies running through your production, whereas today you'll be using a standardized yeast from Maori or Almond or whoever, whereas in the early 90s you're probably using what you can buy.
Yeah, and that could change. So
absolutely.
Well, I mean, Ollie, I love starting with whiskeys like this because this is kind of my jam. These like old, tired refill cask whiskeys where you get this natural oxidation. There's a little bit of oak character in there, but it's not the driving force behind it. And you know, I know with Evan and some of my team, you know, there's sometimes they're kind of on board with that. We like these interesting old oxidized whiskeys, and it's something we're seeing less and less of because I think, you know, you as an independent baller know this as well as anybody, like those stocks of 20-plus-year-old whiskeys that have been kicking around are a lot less, and they're not as common as they used to be. And we're into this era, you know, the early 2000s where the industry really started to recover, and that the most recent boom period started, and people started investing in oak and, you know, going for, you know, fresher wood. And, you know, makes me think is this a style that we're not going to see as much of over the next decade or so because of the way they made whiskey in the 2000s and the 2010s?
I think that there is some truth in that. Certainly, among distilleries like Bruichladdich, you know, well, Bruichladdich is a really extreme example because they don't even make the same style of spirit today. There's almost no relation from what they do in production to this. But your point is absolutely right in that a lot of single malt producers really either cranked up production, so things got shorter and quicker, so maybe a distillate's different, and wood quality has probably improved vastly. Now that being said, you do have some companies like Diageo, which everyone loves to hate. You know, they're the big, giant, scary company. But you know, the wonderful thing about Diageo is they're nothing if not wonderfully consistent in their adhering to having refill wood because it's one, cheap, and two, consistent, so they know what they're doing for blending. So we still buy we fill with Diageo every year, and I still buy wood from Diageo, not for the whole filling. A lot of it we provide our own, but we still buy a certain amount of their refill, because in our inventory we've got mature stock from Diageo in refill, and once it hits 18, 19 years of age, suddenly you've got things that are starting to become really pretty, like some of the Linkwoods we're coming into now, and the Glenelgans from 2006 in refill with us. They're like this in that they've got that kind of oxidative quality to them, and I can only see those things getting better in the next kind of 5 to 10 years. But it's definitely getting less and less, and there's probably distilleries that are more blending distilleries than mainstream distilleries. Yeah, so it's the ever-changing picture.
All right, let's keep this rolling. Next up, Tormore. So this is bottled under your single malts of Scotland label, but I believe when you sent this over, this was believed to be actual Tormore stock, but you didn't have a brand yet. You had a distillery, you had stock, and I mean, we were talking about this before we started the tasting tonight. The brand is a work in progress. You've got some placeholder bottlings that have been released, which we'll start seeing in Canada later this year. But I mean, when some of this came out, like you were still trying to figure out what Tormore was going to be.
Yeah, so we bought the distillery at the end of 2022. In terms of actually getting our hands on the casks, that was really the start of 23. We started going through stocks. I remember saying to Sukhinder at that point, having gone through probably about 1,000 cask samples, I said, I think it'll take us 18 months to get the stocks to where we need them to be able to create a brand. And he said, right. And I said, it'll take you 18 months to do packaging. So if you start now, by halfway through 2024, we'll have a brand. And he said, yes. And then he didn't do anything. Till this year, basically. So in the meantime, we've been working with liquid. We basically have a re-racking program. We re-rack about 2,500 barrels a year of Tormore. It's a really big distillery. It's really difficult to explain. We're not a big company. We are a small family-owned business. I can't stress that enough. I work directly with the two owners of that business. There's still not more than 20 people, 25 people outside of our distillery employed by the company. The distillery is a whole different side because of the scale of it. So it produces currently 3.5 or 3.3 million litres of alcohol on a 5-day week. Its potential is about 5 million litres. And in today's world, that maybe doesn't sound as big because you have got Macallan able to do 20 million and Glenlivet able to do 20 million. You have to remember that's recent. Like if you went back a decade, Tormore would have been one of the biggest distilleries in Speyside. What that meant was when we took it on, we really had no idea of this kind of scale of it. And coming from our background, where we've always been we became a reasonable size independent bottler. But I honestly, outside of maybe Kalila, I was feeling Kalila's the only distillery I would fill over 100,000 litres of alcohol. And at Tormore, you can do that in a week. So it's a whole new kind of scale. So when we chose this cask, it was the really early days. This would have been from one of the casks lying on site that we pulled samples from in the Jan of 2023. And the one thing that became really apparent to me was that when you fill Tormore at the right strength, so this was filled at 63.5% into first of all bourbon barrel. It had this amazing kind of pear and peach quality. And it's actually flavors that you can smell in the still house. They're new make flavors. As you walk through the still house, the whole setup is designed to make light whiskey. It actually is recorded in the planning for the distillery. It said it was specifically designed to make a light sweet spirit for the North American market. That is what it was designed to build, right? It's designed to make. We are not Macallan. We can't do the heavy stuff. We're not there. what happens with it as a distillery is if you put it into like a lot of the stock we have, which is for blending, put into refill wood at high strength, you actually get loads of tannic extract and it becomes quite peppery and quite nutty. Look at that handsome man.
Now, here now we're in the distillery.
Yeah, so like as you look at this picture, one of the things to note, you can just about see, well, you can certainly see on the two spirit stills there, you can see the big tanks at the end of the stills before the condensers. Those are purifiers. So they've got a massive copper plate in the middle of them, and we have one on every single still. And they're just designed to take out heavier compounds. So the whole distillery setup is basically set up to make this lighter spirit and to make it kind of light, premium, sweet. So in its real happy place, you want American oak, because if you think about those flavors of peach and pear, you just basically want to cover it in custard. And we do have stocks of like this one of 2010, 2015, 2012, 2009, like when I'm drinking, which are first fill bourbons, but it's a really tiny amount of our stock. It probably sits currently outside of what we've filled since we bought it at about 5% of our total stock holding, 5-10%. So it's tiny. One of the big changes we made is filling. So with all our new make, about 40% is filled into wood like this, 63.5 and into first fill bourbon, because I believe this is the epitome of Tormore.
Well, I think Ollie, I mean, I don't know if you just mentioned this, but I know one of the things we talked about was your approach to filling, because you're filling at a different strength than Chivas was when they owned it. I mean,
Yeah,
because and I remember you talking about, this is not something I'd heard of before until I visited you at Tormore, but this proofing down of casks because they were just too hot. I mean, and you know, everybody remembers the early days of Bruichladdich, and they were filling things at still strength, and you know, so you'd get these cask strength 10-year-old whiskeys that were still 65, 66% alcohol. But I think one of the things that really surprised me was that the science behind the filling strength you use and why you maybe didn't feel that the way it was being done was the best approach for the distillery.
Yeah, so if you've got, because maturation essentially is a three-part process, you have an extraction element to it, you have the interaction element to it, and then you have an oxidative element. And they all work together because your extractions get oxidated, right? So that's going to happen later in the process. But with your extractions, you've got various compounds within the wood that you're going to extract, particularly if you're looking at American oak. You know, you want vanillins, for example. You want the sweet stuff. That's why you're using it. Most of those compounds are water soluble. They like water. They don't like alcohol. So if you stick something at 68.5%, the first thing you do is you extract tannins, which actually give you lots of color, right? So there's a good reason to fill at high strength. You get a lot more color from your wood. Your whiskey will get a lot darker. Obviously, people really want dark whiskies. If you fill at lower strength, you won't get as much color, but what you will get is more of the wood sugars. So you'll get sweeter notes, and it softens out the whiskey as well a lot quicker. So we do various things. One that is borderline illegal is we proof down mature stock. So it's borderline illegal because I'm currently fighting with the SWA over it. Right, I will win.
I support you in this, by the way.
Yeah, I've got loads of evidence that it's historic and we've been doing it for decades. But the idea is that if you have stock like ours, which has been filled at 68.5%, and all you've got is kind of tannic extract, you basically need to get rid of that. So you proof it down to say 60%, put it back into fresh wood, and what you're going to start to do is extract all those water solubles and get all these sweeter notes coming through, and that's going to balance out your profile. So that's what we do on the mature side with the stock that's basically buggered because it was put at too high strength. And then on the new make side, we basically have a filling campaign that's dictated by wood style. So bourbons I fill at 63.5, nothing particularly fancy. If I've got anything that's, for instance, if I've got a toasted bourbon barrel used at someone like Michter's or something like that, then I might fill at 60%. If I'm using new wood, I'll fill at 60% or even 58%. We're trialing at the moment. And if we're using wine casks, so Sauterne particularly, which we fill quite a bit of Sauterne now, and certainly some of the sherries we fill at 60. And all of that is about trying to get the right extracts at the right time to get the best maturation. The cost to us is pretty simple. We spend more money on wood, so we have to buy more wood for the amount of alcohol we're producing, which is obviously a much greater cost. And also, you can have, because of our climate here and because of the way our warehousing, we've got damp warehousing, all earth floors. Basically, our losses are higher, so we'll lose more alcohol, which can be obviously means we can't maybe get the exaggerated age profiles that other distilleries will get. But I do believe we'll end up with a more balanced product at a 10 or 12-year-old than we would otherwise get. And my proof of that is whiskies like the one you guys are trying, because I could literally sit this cask next to the one next door, which was filled at 68.5, and you'd really struggle to see them as the same distiller. You'd really struggle to see the same flavor profiles. And this really shows off the distillate character, and it marries really well with the barrel. But I came to that conclusion at Tormore. I actually used to have very different ideas on strength. I used to think high strength could be really useful. I've come to the conclusion, working at Tormore, is that for our spirit, for this spirit, it's not it's not a friendly thing. I imagine there are spirits that are probably heavier, that you're going to go for longer aging, where you can use higher strength. Certainly, some of the old distillates filled by DCL and they were bottled as the rare malts were filled at high strength and worked very well after 25 years. What we have found here is some of the older spirit we've got here that was filled at high strength. So we've got spirit filled in the early 90s. Some of it's good, some of it's awful. And it leads me to the conclusion that the one thing you lose is control. I realize it's not romantic, but as someone who just enjoys drinking, I desperately want control to make something taste better.
Well, I mean, on a different level, Ollie, I mean, I used to be all for like the highest proof possible bottlings. I still think bottlings above the mid 40s are generally better, but I'm less married to things being like as close to 60 as possible. And I mean, you do get a concentration of flavors, but then there's also that whole, some things just drink better at a slightly lower ABV or at an adjusted ABV. Like not everything drinks the same or as well at the same strength.
No, I mean, I definitely think that. And you know, that there's loads of evidence of rye and bourbons that drink incredibly well at 63% and 64%. But in terms of lighter Scotch whiskies, I haven't experienced them. If I think back from my personal journey,
for sure. Well, gorgeous Tormore. We're really happy with it. Really tangy, lots of fruit. It's got a little bit of that nice cheesy kind of funk coming through on it as well. It's a gorgeous cask. We're thrilled to have it. Let's move on to the Linkwood, which, I mean, who doesn't love a good Linkwood cask? So this one, 13 years old from 2010, ex-bourbon hogshead, 56.8%. Yeah. Ollie, do you know anyone who doesn't like Linkwood?
No, if I meet them, then I'll report them to the doctor.
Yeah.
I mean, I also think it's the most versatile distiller. It seems to just shine in everything. It's got that lovely kind of apple quality. We were really chuffed to get these casks because most of the stock you get out of Diageo when you're buying direct is in reefer wood. And as we've already talked about, there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to wait a bit longer. Occasionally you get bourbon barrels, but bourbon hoggies are something else. I remember speaking to Greg Glass, now at White Mackay, because it comes back at the time. He used to live a few doors down from me. And the two of us came to the conclusion that the bourbon hogshead, so where you've got you've got a bourbon barrel that you've broken down, you put new ends on the end and made bigger, is the absolute best maturation vessel, because you've got the extra head, they get the extra space. It takes a little bit longer. You get a little bit of extra oxygen. You get slightly less interaction, but you still get fast forward. So we rarely get to buy mature stock sitting in them. It just never happens. We do lay stock down in bourbon hoggies, not as much as I'd like, because they're more expensive to make. But when you find them, they're just beautiful casks.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the bourbon hoggies. To your point about Linkwood being versatile, I mean, all you have to do is look at it from like a heavily sherried Gordon MacPhail sherry cask to, you know, a refill or a first fill or a refill ex bourbon. You almost always get something elegant, even when it's young. You know, it's such an incredible whiskey. For me, especially when it's in refill or ex bourbon, I find it's got this like a pillowy marshmallow kind of fluffiness to it that like, and it's like there's very few whiskeys I find that in, but it's always in Linkwood.
Yeah. No, it's an amazing distiller. And I think it's I don't know, I feel like it's one of those distilleries, a bit like Mortlach, maybe not quite to the same degree, but never quite had its day. Like those G&M bottles, the old G&Ms, where you could buy the 72s, 73s, and even when they used to have the 30-year-old, they're stunning whiskies. Like they're really stunning whiskies, and they were up there with the Macallans at the same time and the Mortlachs, but no one talks about them. No one talks about it as a distiller quite in the same way.
Well, there's no one sitting in a Bentley telling you you can't come in because you haven't paid £50. So
there's probably someone in a Diageo jacket telling you can't come in.
You're right. You still can't go in. You still can't go in.
You don't have a hard hat or.
But maybe if they opened a visitor center that you couldn't go into, and somebody in I don't know, a Rolls Royce was sitting there telling you you can't go in, then Linkwood's star would start to rise.
You sound bitter, Andy.
No, I love taking the piss out of Macallan because I just think it's the most overrated, underperforming load of bullshit. And yeah, that's
my 8-year-old son agrees with you. He went there for dinner last year. He was very unimpressed by the whole thing.
Nice. I like that.
He also got to answer one of the people came up and told, he's 8, obviously, and they're like, he's a child, he can't go around a distillery. And my 8-year-old very quickly turned and said, I go around a distillery every day. Like, that's true. He does.
Yeah, we've bottled some great Linkwoods over the years. I'm not even sure this is our first from Single Malts of Scotland, but lovely cask, lots of nice layers to it, really rich, sweet, floral, great dram. We'll keep things rolling here, just partly because I'm sensitive to the time, Ollie. I know it's much later there for you as it is for people on this side of the pond. Now, in addition to doing single casks, you also do bottlings for the export market, and I think that's what we're going to be moving into next with the Bunnahabhain and the Orkney. Still single casks, but casks that were released, and handful of cases go to each market. Do you have kind of a strategy when you're picking and bottling casks for Single Malts of Scotland? Because I can't imagine you always have enough to go everywhere.
So it's changed a little bit, and you guys will see a change next year with the new pack and everything. When I started, it was very much a kind of cask by cask basis, and it sounds awful, but it never felt like we didn't have that many markets around the world. I think when we first came to Canada, and it was probably number 15. But then we didn't have a sales team either, so it was a limited situation with just me and a suitcase. So the fewer the better. Today we try and bottle batches of casks at a time. So we'll bottle now. The example would be if I've got 3 or 4 casks of Dalu in 2008 in the same cask style, and they're all good quality, then what I'll do is I'll be bottling one after the other, and on the list, like, we're not specifying which cask you're getting. from a customer point of view, that can both be really annoying when a whiskey fund obviously gives a review of one particular cask number and everyone gets really excited. But from a logistics point of view, it's a little bit easier. But back when we bottled these, it was very much like if I found one good cask, we'd just bottle it and then it would be sold and gone. And I still quite like that. But it makes me sound like a bit of an arsehole when I'm like, yeah, tough, you can't have any.
Yeah. Or you get 2 cases. Your market gets 3 cases.
2 cases, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
you and Graham can arm wrestle for it. And
that's right. Well, this next one up here, this is a 12-year-old Bunnahabhain. I haven't tried this yet. I'm excited to try this here. Sherry butt. So you probably had a little bit more of that to spread around than some of the others, than a bourbon barrel or a hoggy. 2009, 12-year. What do we know about this one, Ollie? Like, I mean, when you think of young Bunnahabhain, you think peated. Like, I automatically assume it's going to be peated.
So it's unpeated, but it's a refill butt. Not festival. So I mean, you see that in the color. When we bottled this, I got told off recently because the label simply says butt, and the reason for that was that the guys used to just take the information off my stock sheet, and I wasn't trying to be difficult. It's just when you buy casks, you actually get very little information. I think independent bottlers live in a really weird world. We're in the geekiest part of an industry that's desperate for information, but you're buying from a market that doesn't give you any.
Right.
And so what quite often happens, and I'm not naming any names, but quite a lot of people just make up stuff, And we'll talk a bit about that, about the blend at the end. Like, you'll quite often hear these things that people tell you, oh, I know this, I know it's in this type of wood. And the reality is, on the stock sheet, all it says is that it's a butt. It holds, give or take, 500 liters. And you don't know how old it is until, quite frankly, the cask turns up. So we don't, for our part, we don't bottle ourselves. We bottle at third party, 3 different third party bottling halls down in the Central Belt. But we now move all our stock to Tormore, and we do that so that we can see the cask ends. And that's the closest thing I'll get to information quite a lot of the time. So what I can tell you is it's a refill butt. It's not. It didn't have any distinguishing markings in terms of telling me who the bodega was or anything like that. It was simply a large cask. It probably had Scotch whiskey in it beforehand. But it doesn't feel like it was like a massively tired cask either.
No.
So it still has character there. New make wise, similarly, if it says Bunnahabhain, 9 times out of 10, that means it's unpeated spirit. 9 times out of 10, because Bunnahabhain is a tricksy distillery. For those that haven't visited, if you do, either meet David Brodie, because he's one of the most wonderful people in the world. He'll talk to you about sherry for the rest of your life. Or if you can, get hold of Andrew Brown, because he'll tell you, he's a distillery manager, and he will tell you everything.
Yeah.
But sometimes there's too much information. And the one thing
I get the warts and all with Andrew. So
yeah. The thing I remember is finding out how many different bloody makes they've got, because I think a lot of people think there's just peated and unpeated, and then you sit there going, well, no, sometimes it's a bit peated, sometimes it's unpeated, but it came just after a peated run and we name it this. And then afterwards you just lose the will to live to try and figure out what they're doing. So
I think I was at Bunnahabhain with Evan in 2019, and Andrew was like, can you keep a secret? And I was like, no. He said, we're basically 85% of our production this year is 40 Diageo. We're basically trying to reproduce Kalila. And he's like, can you believe it? They're paying us to make their whiskey for them. So
yeah,
he just thought it was hilarious.
He a few years ago, so we fill at Bunnahabhain every year. I fill both peated and unpeated there, and mainly for elements of Islay. And a few years ago, I was on the ferry with him, and he said, "Oh, you just took 2 tankers of Stoisha." I said, "Yeah." He goes, "All the malt came from Port Ellen," and that was the same year that Port Ellen had cut their contracts with the Freud and Ardmore and Kilhoman. And he's like, so it turns out they had far too much malt, so we bought it all. And it's those kind of moments where you're like, there is no all of these kind of bits of information that you think you get from distillery companies. Quite often it's kind of, it's not this marketing fluff, but they're trying to simplify what happens at their site, and their sites are dictated by chance. So, you know, you'll have a distillery like Lefroy, their message is always going to be, yeah, it's Isla peated barley, it's blah blah blah. They're not telling you that, well, actually, we can no longer buy malt from Diageo, so most of our malt's actually coming from Simpsons on the mainland, and it's peated with malt with peat from somewhere up in the northeast.
Aberdeen, yeah.
To the same extent that Bunnahabhain aren't telling you, well, this year we happen to buy peated malt from Port Ellen. The details, anytime someone asks me about the details, particularly around something like Bunnahabhain, I'm always like, well, could make some educated guesses.
Well, and it's always, I mean, they cleaned it up eventually, but it was always such a sad kind of drab. Like you were expecting Oliver Twist to come around the corner, like begging for some porridge, kind of distillery. And I don't know, there was something charming about that. And I remember going there probably around the 2015 Feshiel, and they had a sherry butt that people were tasting, and it had a lead patch on it, and I'd never seen that before. And they're like, "Oh yeah, we're supposed to get rid of those." Like it was literally a piece of lead that they had hammered onto the cask to stop it from leaking.
I have, so there's two stories I always think back to in that period of time. One was the year I went to Bunnahabhain, Deanston, and Tormore all in about a 6-month period. And I remember turning up at Bunnahabhain, and it was when John was still there. The tour guide turned to us and he said, "I'm really sorry about the state of the distillery." And bear in mind, they still had a TV on wheels, a bit like you're at school watching. You know, you all remember that TV got wheeled out. And he said, "Yeah, we don't get any money here at Bunnahabhain because all the money gets spent at Deanston." And then I turned up at Deanston and it was in a pretty poor state. And I'm like, "Yeah, we don't get any money here because it all gets spent at Tobermory." And then you go to Tobermory and they're like, "Yeah, we don't get any money here because it all gets spent at Bunnahabhain." And you say, he says, "There's no money, like no money's being spent anywhere." And the flip side of it is today, obviously, it's actually beautifully painted and it's really well looked after. But it is my running joke every time I see Andrew and someone's got paint out painting something. I'm like, "There's spending money on paint now, Andrew." And he's like, "It's such a waste." He gets really irritated by it. So it's a brilliant distillery. I love it because it feels quite, to your point, it does feel quite gritty. It feels like a real place. Does that make sense? It's not, well, it's not really massage.
It's lived in. It has that, whereas you go to Macallan and it's like, don't touch anything. Like that's the kind of, like it's too pristine. It has to be protected. I mean, what I missed was the old Bunnahabhain where you could probably get tetanus from the stills. Like if you rubbed up against them too close. Like it was, but it didn't affect the spirit. It had zero effect on the distillate. It was purely a cosmetic thing.
It's always made beautiful whiskey. Like the older the distillates from the late 80s were just incredible. Similar to the Bruichladdich we tried earlier, like fruit driven, but quite dense in comparison. Really special place.
Quite grassy on the nose. It has this youthful side to it, but the palate is quite soft and quite balanced. Nice little Bunnahabhain. Decent price too. We don't see a lot of cask strength single cask Bunnahabhain anymore. Certainly not at a reasonable price. So that's a nice one to have. Now, I mean, at a certain point of time, Ollie, are these casks that would have possibly gone into elements of Islay or a Port Askaig balling as opposed to a single malts of Scotland release?
So Elements of Islay has gone through various changes, and it might have another one. We'll have to see. You know that we used to bottle single malts under Elements of Islay in small batches, as you guys probably remember, in 50 CLs, and that all started because whiskey was plentiful. Andrew and we were both talking about this before. It's cyclical, right? Ups and downs.
Yeah.
I think the last time I was actually in Canada, I remember describing independent bottling because I was doing a panel tasting with a load of distillers, and I described independent bottling as the whelk on the bottom of the boat. We are, the leech stealing from these poor big distillers. And certainly in that period of time, and I'd say up until about 18 months ago, a lot of distillers have viewed independent bottling in that way. They wouldn't sell to you. They look down on independent bottling. I've always been of the view that independent bottling builds brands. Like, there'd be no Talisker if it wasn't for G&M. There'd be no Macallan. In fact, the list of distilleries that wouldn't exist without G&M are quite frightening. When we started bottling elements of Islay, it was the kind of early 2000s, or when we started buying the stock, early 2000s, and you couldn't get arrested selling Islay whiskey. I always say the same thing, and it sounds so ridiculous, but when I started at Whiskey Exchange, we were selling Port Ellen for £70 a bottle, and struggling. Like nobody wanted it. So we could afford to buy casks of Ardbeg and Lafroig and Port Ellen and sell them in a 50 cl bottle for 50 quid, and everything was great. So to your point, yeah, we were buying stock like this Bunnahabhain, and we would look at that. After quite a few years, that became steadily more difficult, and it became easier to buy blended malt. So we had a filling program with a very large distiller on the south coast of Islay as blended malt, with one beginning with L that's not like a William that I can't name, and we started using that and blending it with Kalila to make the current elements of Islay range, so Cask and Sherry Cask, bourbon cask. Certainly because the single malts were becoming so dear to replace, it was made more sense for us to bottle them in single malts of Scotland. What I will say is we're in a time of change again. Ardbeg was making 2 million litres of alcohol last year, and it's making less than 800,000 this year. So all of that means that in the next few years, everybody suddenly needs money again, and we're really popular with the distillers. So the swings and roundabouts of independent bottling, and as long as you know that and you're happy with it, it means that when the times are difficult like this for the industry, they're pretty good for us.
Yeah. Well, it's, a couple of businesses, like whether it be, Gordon MacPhail, like the old stories about when times were tough for the industry, that's when you get your checkbook out.
Yeah.
And you do some deals. And kind of doubling down on the comment you made about the whiskey industry liking to pretend that it doesn't need the independent bottling side of things. I mean, would Diageo have ever tried to make Mortlach into a single malt brand if it wasn't for all the independent bottlers capitalizing on bottling Mortlach and the cult following that had? They wouldn't even have bothered trying. So
no, I mean the industry is a funny place. You have the different sides, right? So we all of us deal. We're all customers. I buy far too much whiskey, as my wife told me yesterday. And the brand side of the distillers is pretty horrible to the independent bottlers. But to be fair, the bulk side, Diageo's been supplying us consistently every year. So I think largely those kind of things ebb and flow. The most responsible companies, so your Diageo's, particularly your Diageo's, they see that they have to support customers like us and Gordon MacPhail, because when times are bad like now, we are the one place that they can come for money. And your point, absolutely. I don't think the bulk guys think that way, but I do think the new distillers. So we do loads of work with Ardmore, and we do loads of we don't release a lot, but I buy a lot.
Tell me more.
For the future, Andrew. And we do that because they see us as an opportunity to build their brand, and we see it as an important distiller to support. So we do the same with Torabeg, we do the same with a few others.
Well, it's a crowded market, and I'm sure even in that scenario, you've got to be somewhat selective these days. Speaking of probably bulk sales, but also a distillery that realized a few years ago it needed to unload some liquid somehow, even if you couldn't call it what it is. Shall we move on to the Orkney?
Yeah, sure. That unknown Orkney, which we put a picture on the bottle, which also indicates the lack of a name.
Yeah.
You'll notice that there isn't a pipe bridge going over the road, which is either a problem. It either tells you when the drawing was done, because do you guys all know about the pipe bridge?
I do, but you might want to you tell the story to those who
This is a
don't.
terrible story. So this was distilled at Highland Park. There's only two distilleries in Orkney, obviously, and it's not Scapa for a variety of reasons. One, it doesn't taste like Scapa, would be the major one. Well, Highland Park sits at the top of a hill in Kirkle, and it's got a pipe bridge. Well, it had a pipe bridge that runs across from the distillery to some tanks on the other side of this road, and it's the main road out of the town. And there was a gentleman from New Zealand who'd moved to Orkney and set up a crane company. And he one day he was driving out of the village, and he'd forgot to put his crane down, and he drove into the pipe bridge, taking out all the pipes which ran all of the effluent and all of the spirit over to the tanks, closing Highland Park for 6 months and costing millions and millions and millions. He no longer lives on Orkney. No one's quite clear where he went to. I don't think he's welcome there anymore. But yeah, for some reason, Highland Park suddenly needed money. So as you said, Edrington sold a lot of stock. It was about the same time they were building Macallan as well. They sold a lot of Orkney, what it was called, Island Single Malt. I think it was described as, with brackets, Orkney. And they also sold Speyside Single Malt, which obviously from Edrington could have been Glenrothes, but all the casks turned up with a big M on the side. So you'll quite often see now Signatory bottling Speyside N. Yeah,
Does that look like the pipe bridge that is?
That does look like the pipe bridge, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Ollie, I mean, a lot of these are gorgeous whiskeys, and you can be careful and say what politically correct and watch what you say here, but like as someone who loves whiskey and as someone who genuinely loves Highland Park, I've been there 4 or 5 times. You know, I used to love the 18 like 15, 20 years ago. It was one of my favorite whiskeys. It would be my Christmas bottle of whiskey. You know, they went down this Viking bullshit rabbit hole, and you know, the branding became more important than the liquid. And over the last 10, 15 years, I felt like the quality of the 18 just kept going down and down and down and down. And it's just to me, it's sad because it's a whiskey with such great potential. Occasionally we see some gorgeous single casks from Gordon MacPhail or Signatory, someone who's managed to acquire stuff and hold on to it and then bottle it. And the best Highland Park that's being bottled today is the stuff that can't even be called what it is.
But I mean, I don't know enough about the inner workings of Edrington today to specifically comment. I can say there's a few things that they definitely do differently, but they have done historically. So one, they do fill at a high strength. Historically, have always filled at a high strength. You'll notice the strength on this is only 56.5. One of the reasons for that is we took the spirit in a vat and we re-wrapped it into our own wood at a lower strength, which obviously is completely illegal, but we did it. And Edrington didn't have a problem with it because they do it too, as do Diageo and White Mackay. So one of the reasons I feel that this particular cask settled quite well is because you've got that better integration. However, one of the things I think that has changed is probably wood policy at Edrington, and this isn't a dig at them. You know, I work very closely with Polly Logan, who's our distillery manager here at Tormore. She was the whiskey maker for Macallan, so she was working up close with their wood policy, and I think they became very invested in a very precise wood policy. And this happens at quite a few distilleries. They'll limit their purchasing to 1 or 2 coopers because they want control. You know, I talk about control in the same way. We actually buy from a range of coopers and then we track it, but that's quite labor intensive. It's quite hard work. But we do it to give ourselves variety. And I definitely think that there's a period in Edrington's history where they had a different type of supply for sherry. It comes into Old Highland Park and also your blend as well, Andrew, which we're going to try at the end, which is Edrington wood. And the quality is really high. Like it's really good quality. So I wonder how much has changed there in terms of the staff over the last 10, 15 years in terms of what wood they're choosing and the reasons for it and what they're looking for. And maybe to some degree, an obsession with getting something the same has led to losing maybe the finesse that certainly I loved in Highland Park 18 when in the dumpy bottle.
Yeah.
It's just still one of the most fabulous things you'll ever drink.
Well, you know, Ollie, I mean, I think to your point, I mean, and I don't know, you probably have been down there too. Like I've been down to Macallan's two main suppliers in Harath for casks, and I think you're bang on. Like they went for this consistent, like narrow range of profile cask, and they've been filling everything into that. And as I mean, and it's not bad. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, especially anytime I've opened Macallan 12 or 18 sherry oak for a tasting, I have to admit the quality of liquid they're putting out is still very good. It's just not exciting. And I think that's the biggest drag that I would have on them. It's consistent, it's good enough. I don't think it's good enough for the price they're asking, but it's just not exciting.
I think that's probably without wanting to bash another producer. That I think that's sometimes where you end up. I do find I find in my position being we're outside, right? Well, we're now a distiller, so it's a slightly different situation. But watching from the outside, it's really fascinating to see how the different companies deal with situations. So Diageo have a completely different attitude. Wood is wood. They just need to buy a lot of it, but then they have to buy more than everyone else. So they don't have the same fuss. What they do have is an incredibly hard-working blending team. And if you ever meet Emma Walker as an example, like the woman's fucking genius. She's a really smart woman, works really hard. And I remember sitting with her recently, and I sat with Jim Beveridge before. And what really took me was they're not in control of that, right? And they fully accept they have no control here. It is we have some ingredients and we have to figure this out and make Johnny Walker Black at the end. And that's an amazing piece of work. Whereas someone like Edrington, they look at it the other way. They say, okay, we'll control this, and then we'll need to do less work at this point. But maybe you lose some of the finesse and the beauty in Scotch whiskey in that.
Fair enough. All right. Ollie, I think Evan, when he put this lineup together, he decided that we would do the blend next. And I think the reason for that is just because that Ardmore leans into a little bit more peat. It's got a bit of a profile to it. So I think we're on to the Walter's Choice bottling next. Now, this is something that you and I talked about a long time ago. I really wanted to have. I mean, we've done some old blends before from companies like Berry Brothers. All of these whiskeys are these undisclosed blended whiskeys that when you start digging or at least start, asking questions, curiously seem to trace their way back to that one company that owns Macallan and Highland Park. And I mean, I'm interested to know what your take on this is. And I'm sure there's not one sole reason, whether it's trying to find a way to sell liquid to bring in cash. One of the stories I heard going way back when was that they pre-vatted a lot of stuff as part of an age statement famous grouse project that they kind of started to launch and then they decided not to keep going with. Like, where does all this old sherried taste very Macallan-esque blended stock come from?
So the stock that you're actually trying is Edrington, but We actually buy blend from everybody. There's blend available from most of the big blending houses. So whether that's Willie Grant's or Diageo, and we have some old blend from all those companies in inventory. My understanding is a lot of it is they tend to be projects. They either get halted for one reason or another. So, you know, I've got some amazing early 90s blended malt, blended malt, which is incredibly smoky. Like it's quite clearly got Kalila in it. Like it's just, you know, screams it. And clearly this is something that was made for a fancy Johnny Walker or some description and then got benched. And at some point it sits there, you know, it sits there in cask. And this kind of goes to my reason that I'm writing the SWA wrong. When you're blending like that, what you're doing is you'll do reduction to a strength above bottling strength for vatting to get good integration. And sometimes you'll put it back to wood, and you'll put it back to wood to rest it. The other thing will be maybe you've blended a product. So this happens all the time, even at our level. So I put a Skeg 8 as an example. We will always over batch. So if I need to make 1,000 cases, I'll batch up for 1,200 cases, and I'll put the remnant stock back. So if you're blending like that and someone orders 1,000 cases, but you've made 2,000 cases, you put the rest back and it sits in cask. And the problem is you've probably reduced the strength. So you'll notice the strength on this will probably be what, I can't remember what.
47.8, isn't it? Yeah, 47.8.
Yeah. So it'll have been batched at say 50. And now it's sitting in butts and resting in these sherry butts, and they're sitting it there going, well, it's getting older, so we now need to move it on. And being frank, the conversations are just us saying, do you have any old blend? And they'll go, oh, actually, we've got some of this available. Would you be interested? In terms of the style, like the ingredients and things, the biggest nonsense is they don't tell you, right? They're not telling you what's going in, and the conjecture over what's going into them negates the changes in businesses. So you're absolutely right. Something like this from Edrington, there is a kind of Macallan-esque weight to it. It definitely has a fullness to it that screams that kind of style of spirit. But I've heard various people say stuff like, oh, it's made up just of Macallan, Highland Park, and Glenrothes. You're like, aha. Well, it would have been actually blended, because it's blended 2005. So it's actually blended by Highland Distillers. You know, they also owned
Glengoyne, Tamdhu.
but Harbin at one point.
Yeah.
And if you look at the stock holding they have, because quite often you can see where casks were going, they held stock from lots of distilleries. So you don't know what they were putting together and why, like, because everyone's trading all the time. What you can say is that it's an incredibly well made old style blend, and it's been wrapped in 2005 into an incredibly beautiful sherry butt. Anyway, as you said.
No, go ahead. You finish your point before I move on.
I think these whiskies for me are actually at the very heart of what independent bottling should be about. Like all the geeky detail, all the conjecture is fantastic. It's great fun. Our job is just to put something that tastes really good in a bottle, kind of regardless of all of the detail. It has to taste great. So these casks, I mean, I adore this stock. We still have a few casks left, not many, which we're managing. But they're really special. I'm really glad we got spot one for you.
So we've done a lot of bespoke labels over the years. Now, obviously, if we're working with Elixir and we do a single cask of a single malt, that typically goes into a single malts of Scotland label, where they're kind enough to give you, and I don't know if anyone noticed this before, but like, I think this was a Chris Mabin decision way back when. We get our own color. We get our own Kensington Wine Market yellow little box on them. And I mean, for me, that's incredible. I love that we have that one little detail. Very, very, very happy with that. But this was something different. This was not going to be a single malts of Scotland bottling. We needed to come up with a custom label. I've obviously done a fair number of labels with my face on it, and I fully understand that probably got old for some people, especially with Glenfarclas and all the ones we did. But people who come into the store seem to love my dog, Walter. And when we had this opportunity, what were we going to put on the label? Lily, who was with you at that time too, big dog fan as well. I was like, I actually had this vision where I wanted to do a riff on Where's Waldo, but instead it would be Where's Walter. So it would be some kind of collage image, and you'd have to find my dog in it. Recognized that that was going to be too complicated, probably too expensive, also might lead to getting sued. So instead, we just went with kind of a fun, playful label. And before I show you all the bottle, I'm going to quickly show you the label because you can see it in slightly better detail. Ollie, I've been teasing people about this for 2 months. I've had 2 emails from people in the tasting today. Are they going to get to see the bottle? Will they get to buy it? There's been at least one comment in the chat. So this is the Walter's Choice label. It's blended Scotch whiskey, man's best blended Scotch whiskey. Some other fun things, special treat for all the goodest boys and girls. The one detail that I love is if you look really closely under aged 44 years, it says 308 dog years. Now, Ollie, is that the sort of thing that if the SWA saw it, they would come and try to give me a slap on the wrist for it?
Honestly, probably not.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, it depends which lawyer you get. You get Lindsay, he'll probably be fine with it. But if you get Alan, then he'll tell you off. And it is that simple. There's no consistency.
Well, it's very fine print, so it's hard to see. But here's the liquid. I'm going to just refresh this because I did say that if anyone in tonight's tasting, this is going to be on our website until 8 p.m. So if you don't want to wait until Friday to buy a bottle, you can buy one now. They're on our website now. Other than that, you're going to have to wait till the website page goes live on Friday. There'll be more details at that time, but you can see it's got a nice color to it. It's gorgeous liquid. I mean, this is Ollie, one of the things that I love about this is like this is what old whiskeys used to taste like 20 years ago. And you don't see as much of these anymore. Like when I started, I don't think I had a sense of how spoiled I was. Um, for choice and for things that I got to try. But like it was these old school sherry cask whiskeys, these old style whiskeys that they crop up from time to time now, but they're a lot more rare. And it's that, especially with sherry, that really delicate profile. It can be rich and have color, but it's not just this one-dimensional, gooey, dark, spicy sherry bomb.
It's got they have this busty, dank. Conal McKenzie and I talk about this quite a lot, right? So he actually only lives in Nairn, which is not far from me, so we're not a million miles apart. And it's one of our favorite tasting notes is dank because nobody thinks it sounds very nice. But in these old-fashioned kind of sherries, it's this earth floor thing that sits there, and it's round and it's thick and it's weighty, but it's some, to your point, it's somehow more delicate because you don't have this kind of hit of ginger. It's like it's not big spice notes that you get in modern sherry. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like I'm a big fan. We use Miguel Martin quite a lot, which is a really big supplier to Current Macallan and big supplier to Suntory. Completely understand the purpose of that. We have lots of inventory, but it's not the same as this rounded kind of earth floor, almost mushroomy, almost savory. Which it's definitely not completely being lost, but it's difficult to find.
When you can layer into that, you get these nice, delicate, kind of syrupy, sweet notes. You can get some of the spirit character, like these oxidized tropical notes creeping through too, because the sherry's not so overpowering that it just kind of smothers everything like a thick blanket. Anyway, we've had the pleasure of bottling some old whiskeys like this. Some of you guys might remember we had our Barry's 40-year-old blend, which again almost certainly was ex-Edrington stock, had a similar profile to this. Not quite the same, but very, very similar. Ollie, one thing I want kind of your thoughts on this because I'm not 100% convinced there's grain in this. And if there is, it's so subtle that I can't even pick it up.
I mean, so there definitely is, because it's the way the regulations are written now, to change your, this is very sad stuff, so I apologize profusely, but basically everything's controlled by the commodity codes. So you have to show an operation. So for us to, for you to have something as a blend, you do have to have evidence of an operation where you've added malt and grain together. Now, that being said, given its age profile, you're already talking about old grain, not young grain. In terms of quantities, I have no idea. There's no way of knowing, but it doesn't taste like it's like incredibly huge quantities of grain.
Well, I think the reason I had that, and I kind of I'm on you with this in terms of like that's likely the style is just you think about the classic, even Johnny Walker Blue or some of their higher end variants, you can still detect the grain. The grain is still like a significant component of that profile.
But if you taste to the juxtaposition, if you taste a 1970s bottle of white ports or a 1970s bottle of 1980s bottle of black bottle,
Yeah.
Or even probably Johnny Walker, although I've only ever had a red label and it wasn't amazing. They feel thicker, they feel heavier, right? So I don't like, they don't feel as grain heavy as maybe I recently finished a Cutty Sark bottle 1970s, and although it's Cutty Sark, so there's quite a lot of finesse to it. It's quite a light blend. It doesn't feel grainy in the same way that, to your point, Johnny Walker Blue, you can tell it's in there. So I wonder how much of it is that you're using grain. They're possibly also using older grain. The AYS, so its AYS is 1980, and that date, so its distillation date, will relate to the youngest whiskey in that blend. It's not related to the oldest. So there's two dates on it. There's the distillation year, which is 1980, and I can't remember what the birth is. I think it's November. And then we get another AYS, which is 2005, and that's the year the operation took place. That's when it was blended. So bear in mind, it's now been in that, but by the time you've had it for the best part of 20 years, right? So it's been marrying for 20 years. But in the youngest thing, and there will probably be a 1980 malt, not necessarily 1980 grain, because your grain you can afford to go older because it's cheaper. Right. If you think, just an example, because it's sitting in front of me, you'll remember like the Invergordon 74s.
Yeah.
Like if you were blending, if that's your grain,
yeah,
that's a completely different process.
Yeah, they're so silky. I mean, they're not like. I mean, we did a tasting with the Whiskey Trail, the cows and the knights, and comparing the Invergordon from the cows, which even that is not quite as old, but it's still pretty old, and the Strathclyde. I mean, the Strathclyde has this sharpness, this kind of solventy medicinal note. It's still beautiful, but it's so distinctly grain. But that Invergordon, you could see that getting lost in a parcel in a mixture of other whiskeys, primarily malts. You could see that just kind of disappearing into the background.
But at the end of the day, we don't know what's in it. We just know it tastes good. And apparently, that's the only thing that should matter. Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, and so a couple of you were asking. The link is on our website. It'll be up until 8 p.m. I'm going to take it down at that time. It'll go back up Friday morning. About this again, some of you may have saw it. It's $500 a bottle, but for 47.8% sherry finished, long-term finish maturation, old blended stock whiskey. It's an absolutely gorgeous bottle. Ollie, I'm thrilled that this actually did come to fruition because, despite the fact that you might still have some of this kicking around your warehouse, like I know that these are every year there's less and less of this around.
Yeah, we have maybe 4 butts left, I think is it. and our parcel was the last parcel they sold.
Hmm.
So the original parcel was actually sold, I believe, to the Creative Whiskey Company. I know David Stair bowled a few.
Mm-hmm.
But we're talking, he bought them as like a 30-year-old, a 32-year-old, 33-year-old, or something. So when you think like that's a decade's worth of stock, it's been sitting and kind of being bowled by various people.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's the very end, and the strengths are starting to dip a little bit now. So
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a gorgeous bottle. One last question on there. How many? The outturn was 471 bottles. How long they last will be an open question. But I mean, we look at this as an opportunity. This is good value whiskey. Don't wait on it too long. We want people to buy it and enjoy it because this is whiskey that you can afford. This is an affordable luxury. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at here. This is something old and rare that you can. I get that it's not $100 or $200, but it's something that you can justify opening and just enjoying. One last whiskey to go through, and then we might do we do a speed round where we go through, but whether we do that or not tonight, I don't know. The last one that we have is Ardmore. Now, I don't know if you and I have discussed this before, but I have I don't know if it's fair to call it a love-hate relationship with Ardmore. It's either brilliant or I can't drink it. Like and it's this distillery where like, especially if it's young and it's not in an active cask, to me, it's undrinkable. But older Ardmore, um, young sherried Ardmore, something I quite enjoy. But it's a weird distillery. I know Evan would disagree with me on this vehemently. He's a huge fan of Ardmore. But we're going to finish off here with a 25-year-old Ardmore single cask, 1998 vintage from a Hoggy at 51.5. So do you remember much about this one? This probably was bottled a year or more ago.
yeah, no, I do remember it because so most of the stock that we bought 97, 98. We bought actually quite a large parcel of it came up. And it's an interesting time because I'm pretty sure Ardmore's direct fired at the time. Direct fired stills. Might be wrong.
No,
Uh,
I think you're right. I think that happened. The changeover was in the early 2000s, wasn't it?
yeah, it's I'm pretty sure it's early 2000s. It changes from being direct fired. So we were offered this huge parcel 97, 98. And the funny thing was, like, given what you just said, it was all in refill casks, and a lot of it was not amazing. Like the spirit was good in itself, but the wood quality was pretty poor, and the spirit definitely needs it needs kind of more active wood. So we actually took most of our stock and we re-racked it into dechar rechar hogsheads. So not quite as intense as STRs, the new fancy word that all the kids are playing with. Not us, by the way. We don't agree with STRs. I think they're evil.
Mhm.
Any dodgy new distillers using STRs need a good talking to. We prefer the good old fashioned dechar rechar. That's where you're rescuing a cask because you don't have enough money.
Mm.
Or if you're us, it's where you're thinking, okay, I don't want too much wood. I kind of want a reliable refill. That's what I want. So from a technical point of view, what you're doing is you're taking an older cask, you're getting rid of a layer of oak and then of the char, and then you're recharring it. And there's two ways of doing that, and they're distinctly different, and they have distinctly different impacts. Nobody's ever going to tell you that. So if you go to Space Cooperage in Alloa, so the big one, they basically use a machine. It's like a wire brush,
Mhm.
strips the inside, and then they reflame it. And if you go to Space Cooperage up here, opposite us, it's actually they literally cut the inside out, so it's a different process. You get to fresher wood. The end result is that you get more vanillins, but it's not quite as active as the first fill. But it does give you a bit more richness. And our idea was if we could just build in a little bit more kind of caramelly notes that would really set off against the smoke in this whiskey. So we did that with some of the 97s and we did it with the 98s. I, like you, Andrew, have definitely got a love-hate with Ardmore. I adore younger Ardmore in relatively active bourbon.
Mhm.
So the example is we bottled quite a lot of Ardmore 2009 that was sitting in refill Lafroig barrels, and
Yeah, yeah.
I thought it was glorious. It's like this
Mhm.
green smoke thing.
I think Evan, we bottled one of those, didn't we?
Yeah, I think you did. Yeah, but
It
I've had
was,
it in just
we might
refill
have had
hoggies.
two.
Okay.
Yeah, I've had it in refill hoggies, and it's because the peat doesn't present itself. It's not Isla peat, so it presents itself as like this green smoke. And
Mhm.
unless you, from in my palate, if you don't have enough sweetness, it kind of doesn't carry through.
Mhm.
I feel like this 25 has all that kind of herbaceousness.
Mhm.
I mean, I haven't got it in front of me. I've got a 15-year-old here, which um, is a 2009 cask, which I'm going to pour for myself. But yeah, I feel like it had, from memory, it had a lot of the kind of green pepperiness. It had that kind of herbaceous side to it, almost like a tea-like quality, like a tannic
Yeah.
quality to it. Does that make sense?
No,
Uh,
it's good. Good note.
yeah. But yeah, I think Ardmore at this age works really well. I think it works, but it still needs wood. Like it needs sweetness, like
Yeah.
just inherently.
Well, I'm glad to know that I have an ally on this because Evan and I have been at loggerheads on this for years now. And I think for me, a lot of young Ardmores have this kind of unpleasant barnyardiness to them. And I mean, and like you can have a pleasant barnyardy note in things, but sometimes it's just, and like there's this like burnt hair note. So I mean, like sometimes I think the peat comes across as like, I don't know, maybe the pony got too close to the fire and some of its hair was singed. But Evans, Evan and I disagree on this one. Um, yeah, Ardmore, older Ardmores. I mean, Gordon MacPhail have had like so many great Ardmores from over the years. But again, they're putting it into fresh sherry. We've had a few Ardmores from Elixir Distillers from refill casks. There was that single malts of Scotland marriage as well, which was quite nice. And what I think is interesting is that some of those rougher notes mellow over time, but then you also get these oxidative notes, and those tropical fruit notes can kind of add this nice backdrop that complements some of those more, rough hewn smoke elements.
Yeah, and even the marriage, we used some Dicha Richa in that as well. So
Mhm.
that is, I definitely feel it needs a bit of wood. It needs a bit of
Yeah.
not too much. I'm not like not crazy dodgy wine casks or any of that crap, but
Yeah.
definitely needs some vanilla. Um, maybe because the smoke doesn't present quite in the same way.
Mhm.
I do
Um,
feel the textures there though, like I'm trying to think if I've got a bottle. I think I've got a bottle of marriage in there somewhere. Um, but from memory, the texture is pretty good. You do have that kind of weight to the 98s, particularly
mhm.
because of that direct fire.
Yeah, no, beautiful, beautiful stuff. All right, we're gonna do a speed round. Before we do it though, Ollie, I do want to ask you a question because you sort of leaned into STR and I agree with you for the most part. There's times where I think as a component it works out, but as a just straight cask, I find it's too much.
When you say component, you're thinking like Rasa. They use it quite.
Well, or if you're, another baller where you're using it as a component flavor profile in your single malt where you've got different elements to it. Um, but I mean, I'm not always a huge fan of the straight naked STR single cask. I find that they're too tannic. Like they've got just too much. Well, it's the same reason I don't like bourbon. I shouldn't say I don't like bourbon. I don't love bourbon, and I don't love bourbon because I find it's just too much wood. And I think that STR, straight STR, is the same thing. But my question for you actually more was to do with wine casks. Some companies seem, and I know you don't use many of them, which I kind of love personally. some companies seem to have figured out how to use them well and others have not. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this as not just someone who makes whiskey, but also as a whiskey geek.
So we use, I think as I said earlier, we use Sauterne quite a lot here at Tormore, which is, fundamentally that's a wine cask. It's, it's sweeter, but it's not fortified, right? Before we started using them, we did quite a lot of research because I vividly remember trying Sauterne casks from people like some of the Bruichladdich stuff that was, actively dreadful, not just not good, but actively bad. And I was really worried about the transport. So we spoke to producers, we spoke to all sorts of people about it. And the conclusion I came to is that the problem with all wine casks is that your alcohol fundamentally is too low in the wine to transport it safely. So the reason they use sulfur is to hold the cask, but then you can get sulfur taint, you've got all sorts of issues there. There are now new systems, so you can use liquefied tannins to hold the cask. That'll buy you about 6 weeks. But the major issue you've got is as soon as you start transporting that cask with very minimal liquid in, the liquid in it will go off. And the easiest way to think about that is if you have a glass of wine and you leave a tiny amount in the glass and you come and smell it the next day, it's not nice. It's not like leaving a tiny amount of whiskey in your glass or a tiny amount of rum in your glass. It's if wine sours quick. And it's the same with beer. One of my very best pals runs Spirit of Yorkshire. We had a long conversation about using IPA casks and beer casks. And the person I went to was Chiro, who has done probably the most successful maturation in beer casks. And the big thing he said to me was, you empty the beer and you fill the whiskey. And I was like, well, when? He goes, like that. Like, you do it instantly because it will go off. Because the alcohol's so low, the beer in the cask will go off and that will spoil the wood. And it's the same with the wine. So, for example, when we move Sauterne casks over here, they have to be filled the week they land. And that's with all the treatment in place. That's with all of the, like, we steam clean the cask before we move them. We will use liquefied tannins to hold the cask in place, and then we will empty all of that, and then we will fill them instantly. And not wanting to build up any kind of suspense here, but the whiskey we're getting out the other end is excellent. Like, we have no taint. It is superb. It works really, really well. If you're using red or white wine, it's the same problem. And the reason it's inconsistent is that simply down to the fact that sometimes the casks are rocking up at the distillery, they've got nothing to do, and they fill it the same day, and it tastes great. And sometimes the casks rock up at the distillery, and they've got 200 refills to fill and some bourbons to fill, and they've got a plan. And then the casks have been sitting there for 5 weeks, and they've gone on. And they fill them anyway. So if you're paying that much attention, you will get a good result. And it is really that simple. And that's before you start looking at trying to use, like, Sekinder's honoured me quite a lot about the idea of wine casks because we've had so much success. He's like, okay, could we use, for example, wine casks from the US because maybe the wine's a little bit more, it's a bit sweeter, it's not as tannic. Could we look at that? The problem's the transport. For us from California, that's 6 to 8 weeks in a container. Like, you then have to. So the conversations then: do you use a chilled container to move the wood? And there are companies. There are companies that will do it. Like, you laugh, but you can literally pay to get your container chilled, so you can move the cask. So because obviously chilling it will slow down any degradation of the wine. But these are massive decisions to make, and they're really expensive. So that those are kind of your barriers. My personal view at the moment is that we probably won't play around too much in that world. We certainly wouldn't for any of the independent bottling side. I don't think it's right for our brand, right? And every independent bottler has a different view on what their job is, right? So Graham, one of our best friends, is Joshua Hatton. Joshua and I have the same argument on a daily basis. He believes his job is to find the best single cask at cask strength. I believe my job is to put the best thing in a bottle. There's a nuance in that means we do a very different thing. I don't believe my job is to change the identity of a distillery as an independent bottler. And I think if I started using claret casks and fucking dodgy Italian wines, I'd be fucking around with people's distillate in a way that they wouldn't do. So that's not right. But then there's other independent bottlers who that's their bread and butter. And if it tastes good, good for them.
Well, the takeaways from this all year: A, steam rinse the cask, and B, fill it fast. Like you got.
I mean, yeah, basically, that's the quick and dirty.
One, and I think the two times I don't like it, and this explains it, is A, they're musty and unpleasant AF, and it's because the cask is spoiled, or they've wet filled it. Like they left the wine in and they just dumped the whiskey in over top. And in both cases, I think they're vile, and I hate them. Honestly, I really hate them.
The funny thing is, I spent a week in Bordeaux recently, and because we were looking specifically at Sauternes, but we're also working with some French cooperages on the French oak, and the detail you can get to in terms of wood preparation is wild. Like one of the things you start talking about oak species, European oak, French oak, what that means. One of the funniest things that came up that I'd never thought about in the US, when you're buying wood, when they're specifying what tree, they go into the forest and they find the tree they want and they cut down that tree, right? This tree is right. I will cut it down and I will turn it into staves. Fantastic. That is not how it works in France. In France, the government decides which bit of the forest you're going to get. And what that means is that some of the trees have really fine grain and some of them have very wide grain. And you don't know until you get the logs. And some coopers split that out, right? And believe it or not, that changes your extract massively. So if you're buying wine casks, as an example, and you're expecting it to have a wide grain, loads of tannins, you don't know what's been specified. So I can now work with a winery in Bordeaux for Sauternes and say, do you use fine grain or wide grain? And they'll say, oh, we only use fine grain. And that then, believe it or not, impacts on our whiskey. And I can now work with coopers and ask those questions. But if you're not asking those questions, you have no idea what you're getting. It's just chumps.
Yeah. Well, there was a local company here, and I don't mean to drag this out, but he did import Zinfandel casks from California for a distillery I won't name in Scotland to use to finish the whiskey, and they were dreadful, like absolutely dreadful. And I think this explains a lot of it, is that they take too long to get there. They've gone bad. They probably were never rinsed. And there's a segment out there of people who love those whiskeys, but they were undrinkable. All right. I don't want to beat a dead horse with that. Evan, we got to do the speed round. So we're going to quickly go through the 7 whiskeys. We're going to trigger the poll. So Evan, back to that Bruichladdich 30-year.
It's Sean said pizza dough and margarita pizza on a Bruichladdich from Signatory that was around this age years ago, and it's stuck with me where I still get those notes.
It's quite cheesy on the palate with these nice tropical fruit hints to it. Beautiful, delicate. I mean, that's a nice, easy, anytime dram. All right, what about that Tormore 2010? Oh man, it's so nutty.
Yeah, it's gone nutty.
So
It's
nutty.
macadamia nuts, big time for me on the nose.
Some nice fruit.
Polly and I have an argument about this all the time because I say it's got a walnutty thing in the new make, and she hates walnuts, so she denies this.
I love walnuts. I'm going with walnutty. I like that. Palate, round, fruity. Nice malt notes in there too. Some nice spice. Lots going on. All right, Linkwood.
There's still just like the Linkwood hits a depth stylistically that the Tormore does not, probably because of the distillate and maybe because of the hogshead as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the Linkwood is so drinkable. I agree with Kurt. Kurt put in the chat. I think the Tormore slightly edges out the Linkwood in terms of
Same.
the bottle, but I mean, Linkwood is Linkwood. It's just so good. It's so
Yeah.
consistent. Such great distillate. All right, the Buna. The Buna, it's still farmy. It's like a saltwater marsh now on the nose.
Yeah, with someone's just cutting the hay in the background on the field right next to
A
the
little bit of
ocean.
like seaweed wafers.
Yeah.
The nose,
Great
I
fruity
think,
barley note.
the nose is not, it does not draw me in and make me want more, but the palate on this I love. And maybe it's because it's young. Like this is
Yeah.
young, a little raw, but man, the palate really drinkable, nice fruit notes in there. Orkney, that dare not speak his name.
It's one of the darker Orkneys we've had recently.
We've had some good ones from Elixir. Yeah, there's these coal
Mm.
tar, kind of slightly ashy notes on the palate that are quite prominent. But I mean, I think this is the big one. It's clean. It's
Yeah.
big sherry and it's sort of tannic sherry, but it's clean.
It reminds me of the 18 from like 10 or 12 years ago.
Yeah. All right, Walter, the Walter bottle.
Just a great combination of sherry and tropical notes.
Yeah. Sherry, tropical, channeling some legendary old bottles for me. Things like Compass Box's The General, where you've got that nice mix of like old school antique sherry, tropical fruit
Mhm.
tones. Maybe not quite as like like heavy, but it's just it makes up for it in all the subtleties. That's a great, great, great bottle.
Yeah, it's got that coming on to that bitter chocolate note that you get on a lot of old G&M sherry casks.
Mhm. All right. And Ardmore, back to the divisive Ardmore. Not this bottling, mind you, but just Ardmore in general.
I can't believe how spirit driven this is for 25 years old. Like it's got this young Ardmore for me is always like really sweet and breakfasty, and it's still there, but it's got this structure to it that the younger stuff does not.
Yeah. Um, Gorgeous profile. Tropical, ashy, like kind of, I don't know, like Ollie, do you ever get like, I mean, it's not a forest fire, but like a wetland fire where you've had like a dry season and then like the marsh catches on fire?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that I describe that as green, like there's a green smoke
Mhm.
thing, like a herbaceous smoke thing that I associate particularly with Ardmore, and I don't know how else to describe it.
Mhm.
I've had this
Green.
conversation with Mark Watt quite a lot about color, and for me, Ardmore sits in this green, like lime green smoke thing area.
What color is it for Mark? Because I mean, I know he talks about having synesthesia. So
Oh, God only knows. I mean, I guess it depends how much he's drunk that night, and whether Kate will allow him to.
taupe,
Yeah.
maybe it's taupe, or what's the
If
name?
if they use white smoke to when the Pope is elected, what does green smoke do?
I don't know. All right, I fired up the poll, so the poll is live. Um, Evan, I don't know if you've narrowed down your two favorites. Now, Ollie, I don't know if you can think of all of these and rank them, or if you'd even want to, but for you, yeah, he doesn't want to be put on the spot. You don't have to play this game if you don't want to. We're far less concerned about that, so probably we'll play that game. I've got my favorites. I've sorted
Yep.
out tonight, which is unusual. Evan, have you got yours?
Yeah. Do you want to go first or you want me to go first?
I will, unless Ollie wants to play. If he doesn't, which I totally respect.
I'm quite happy to say which is probably my favorite, but my reasoning isn't because I'm drinking it, because I don't have it in front of me.
Okay.
But my favorite out of this particular selection would probably be the Bruichladdich, but it's
Mhm.
because of the particularly the resonance with, like, I have this memory of bottling the sister cask of this for BR5.
Oh
And
yeah.
I remember selling it at like 50 quid a bottle. And nobody, like, people would not buy it. And I'd be sitting there going, oh, yeah, it's distilled in 1992. I'm like, yeah, we don't care. And I'd sit there crying, going, that it's so beautiful.
Would this have been back in the Vinopolis days?
Just after. I mean, well, Monopolis would have been open 2013.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and you couldn't get arrested selling this whiskey. And all I could think was, it's so pretty. Like,
Yeah.
this is why I was a Bruichladdich collector.
Mhm.
You know, I got better. I recovered. But yeah, and the Bruichladdich I fell in love with was the old 10-year-old. Do you remember just after they relaunched the 10?
Yep.
And
Yeah,
if you
the
do
one they
the
didn't
math,
make.
yeah, they didn't make it. If you do the
Yeah.
math, it's distilled the same time as this. And
Yeah.
it tastes like haystacks and green grass, and
Yeah.
it's just
Mhm.
elegant and fruity. And yeah, so I remember bottling this and thinking, this is my happy place. This is
Cool. Well, that was my second favorite. I'm biased. I like the Walter bottle. That's my favorite one. That's the one I could drink volume of. And for my third pick, I went with the Tormore. I like the fruit and the funk in that. And Ollie, the fermentation times at Tormore, were they doing long ferments like that, those short and longs before?
so yeah, so they've always done shorts and longs. We've always been a 5-day week. Tormore's a really funny place when you when you all come to visit. Hopefully all together. It makes my life easier. So it's designed. It's designed as a community distillery. That might sound a bit weird, but it's designed to have. We have a village. We have a village hall and everything. So it's always been a 5-day week, Monday to Friday. Weekends off for good behaviour. And so we'd always have shorts and longs. The difference is today. So 2010 is an interesting year. It's just before the last expansion. So in 2010, we had 8 washbacks. We didn't have the 11 we have today, which meant that the ferments ran fairly hot because, I mean, Andrew's seen it, right, and stood inside it. So we basically have 3 tun rooms at Tormore. The middle tun room, which is in the middle of the distillery, runs really hot. I mean, like really hot. Like you're basically sitting in an oven. Today it was 38 degrees and you're trying to make beer. Anyone who's ever tried to make beer in their garage realizes that that is an insane idea. Then we have another tun room that's sitting on top of a boiler. It's not as hot, but it's really sweaty. So in 2010, you would have had those 2. And you would have had your ferment times would have been averaging out about 90 hours, 80, 90 hours. Your shorts would have been about 55, 60, and your longs would have been about 105. Today, we run our shorts at 60 and our longs at 120. So we average out slightly higher. Because in 2011 we put 3 more washbacks in, and those 3 washbacks are in a very cold room and locked out.
Cool. All right, Evan, your favorites.
Well, it's quick and easy because they're the exact same as yours. Yeah, the Bruichladdich at second. I think that's a fantastic dram, and it just really clicked for me today. The Tormore at third. This Tormore really gets me excited for trying new Tormore when it eventually comes out. If this is kind of a bit of the profile that we're looking forward to, I think it's going to be amazing stuff. And that Walter's Choice, as much as I usually don't go for the more sherry driven drams, you can't find whiskey like that often. And when you do, you gotta hug it close.
All right, I'm going to end the poll. We'll quickly go through this, and then we're going to let Ollie finally go to sleep, where it is now quite late in the next morning. So favorite whiskey, Walter's Choice 44-year-old blend. What kind of stole the show for first? The Bruichladdich 30-year and the Ardmore neck and neck, but the Bruichladdich edged it out for number 2, Ardmore number 3. Everybody got a vote. That doesn't happen very often, so you got to love that. Second favorite whiskey of the night, much more spread out and much more even. Bruichladdich, Tormore, Orkney tied, and then the Walter's Choice. Now, Evan also loves to throw in his cheeky questions. Did you like the special bottle? Bark once for yes, bark twice for no. And then I'm not sure what woof was for. So was that just like a third option, Evan? Like,
Yeah, I saw that as kind of like an abstention, I
yeah,
guess.
they refused to vote. Well, no one said no, so I kind of like that. And then for Andrew holds the firm belief that 1978 is the best vintage on record. I do say that. Evan cordially believes the best year has to be 1980. Who is right? And Wolf wins. So there you go. It's settled. Everybody's wrong, I guess. Listen, Ollie, thank you very much for doing this. I know you got a young family. It's not easy to stay up late doing it. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on and to go down all the little different rabbit holes that we went down.
I'm honestly a pleasure, and my wife even said I can sleep in, so I have to have a haircut in the morning anyway, so it's all good.
All right. Well, I mean, if it's like a barber shop where they lay you back and you don't have to do anything, that's not the worst thing in the world. So
Andrew, we're in Speyside. None of that happens. I'm being pumped for information. That's what's happening tomorrow.
oh,
Gossip, like they want gossip. That's where I live.
all right. Well, you'll have to do your best to hold them off. Thank you everybody for taking part. I have put the link for the bottle back into the chat one last time. As I mentioned, it is going to come down off the website in about 10-15 minutes, but it will be back up on Friday. There's a decent number of bottles, so you don't need to panic about it. You'll have a good chance to buy it before it's gone. But Ollie, thank you again. Evan, thank you for your part. Everyone else, thank you for taking part in tonight's tasting. I hope you enjoyed it. Look forward to talking with you all again soon. Have a good night.